Welcome, game dev adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Greg Lane about juggling many hats on a small team.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
I'm seeing some sparkle emojis in the chat. Very much matches the vibes. Welcome, everybody. In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. This is a mostly unedited recording of a weekly event we host in our Discord, so feel free to swing by and join us for the next one every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. There are links to join down below. As always, I'm your host, Willem Dalbenthal, the headmaster here at the Indie Game Academy, and the self-proclaimed Purple Wizard of Games. Today, I'm joined by Greg Lane, who is a game designer, writer, or whatever, who was not quite sure what to give us for his job title. And that's specifically because of the topic of today, which is juggling many hats on a small team, and how all of us indies don't really know what we are. We're something, though. Welcome to the show, Greg. What are you having for lunch today?
Howdy. Super excited to be here. I've got microwaved day-old pizza and soda. So
beautiful, amazing.
Yeah.
Breakfast of champions and all that. I hear Greg was also telling us pre-show a little bit about how, unfortunately, he is stricken with COVID, so he's a true trooper. And also I hear that COVID frequently cured by pizza and soda, actually.
I hope so, man. Wouldn't that be the case? That'd be great.
Be wonderful. I'd love it. All right. Well, this is definitely a topic that many people in this room care about. Juggling many hats. We are, of course, the Indie Game Academy. This is the Indie Game Lunch Hour. And so most of us are operating under indie restrictions, which basically means we don't have enough money. And we all do way too much stuff, which means juggling multiple hats is something I think everybody here is well acquainted with. That said, though, as always, I'd love to start with your origin story, Greg. So tell us about where you are and how you got there.
Sure. Currently, I'm physically in Maryland, and I work with a lot of things right now. Number one, I'm an adjunct professor at Anne Arundel Community College. Number two, I'm co-owner of Exit 73 Games. We recently released a game called #Blood across all platforms at the start of this summer. It's a hand-drawn cartoon action-adventure game inspired by Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Powerpuff Girls, and Legend of Zelda.
Awesome.
And also make games independently as Tin Heart Interactive, where I do some like educational games, and then do more like a little more I'm gonna say more out there games, but indie games are already sort of out there anyhow, just more experimental games and stuff like that. So
awesome. That's
what I'm currently doing. How I got wrapped up in all this stuff was purely by accident. I started years and years ago. When I went to college, I didn't know that you could study games. That was not a degree that I knew of or that I was aware of. I went into school to dual major in criminal justice and computer science. It was just after the turn of the century, and so I was like, let's do computer crime because it's the future, right? It's the distant year, the year 2000 and change, and cybercrime is going to be a thing. So I need to know computers and criminal justice. So I went to college, started doing that kind of stuff. They only scheduled assembly at 8 a.m. I don't know if you've ever tried to do assembly at 8 a.m, but that just doesn't work.
Wait,
for
like
me.
Assembly code or like,
yes.
like
assembling?
Yeah.
Assembly code. Right. Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, that's not the best place to like start learning how to talk directly to computers. Right. Yeah. And so I struggled with that a little bit. And while I was in college, my grandmother passed away. My dad told me and my brother and my sister, say, follow your passion, do what makes you happy, do what you like. And so my brother got a tattoo and my sister got a tattoo, and I dropped my majors and became a writing major. So
they all deal with things a different way.
Right. Yeah. So follow your passion is a different thing. So I wound up with a minor in criminal justice, a dabbling of computer science, and a degree in writing. And so I did like all good writers. I went to go work at a coffee shop and I played in a touring band. And so I just was sort of like touring the East Coast, playing in a ska band, just trying to figure out what was next, like career-wise. And as I was doing that, I accidentally kept coming back to games. In college, I spent 2.5 years playtesting pen and paper games with Margaret Weiss. They had the licenses for Battlestar Galactica and Serenity. So those were both like neat sci-fi properties. And pen and paper games are really cool because you see the mechanics directly. You don't really get interfered with like graphics or other stuff like that. You can actually see how the game is put together and how it works moment to moment. So I thought that was really great. When I graduated, I wound up with a whole bunch of these like WiiWare points, like for like Wii games. And so I was like, if I'm going to be a writer, I should start like reviewing games. So I held a little like blog for a while where I was like reviewing some fairly inexpensive WiiWare games. And I found a freelance website where you could write a game script, which I now know is a game design document. So I got one summer I got paid to write a game script. And so when I started to put these things together, I was like, well, I guess I should just apply for game jobs. So I partly did that, and then partly also took Dad's advice, where you show up in a tie and you have a physical resume, and you go to people and you're like, I'm a weirdo with a piece of paper. Will you please hire me? And nobody hired me like that. So I fired out a whole bunch of applications. So yeah, so if you're currently looking for a job, don't worry. It used to happen too, where you didn't get hired. So I fired out a whole bunch of applications online, and I think I heard back from one studio, and they foolishly hired me in New York City.
Wow.
So yeah. So I got to work for Funtank. They're called Funtank. We were like at the right above Tribeca, and we were above the offices where the Beastie Boys had their video production company. And we only met like the people that worked there like that last day that we moved in that office, and they were pretty awesome. And anyhow, New York is great. It's neat, but it's good for indies. But there are not a lot of big studios in New York. So because of that, and because I felt like an outsider trying to figure out how New York worked, how games worked, I wound up attending like basically every lecture, meetup, game dev thing that I could. So I went to all the IGDA events in New Jersey, in New York. NYU had free and open to the public monthly meetups or chats where they got like Adam Saltzman from Finji to come and talk and stuff like that, or Tim Schafer. So like you got to like go and listen to these guys, and like that was my crash course on like learning how games work. To the same effect that you've got your wizard theming for this, as I stood there at NYU just sort of like just cobbling together what I could learn, I often thought of myself as like a little dirt wizard, because I didn't know what parts of the magic made fun happen and what parts were part of the ritual. That like, I don't know if you ever heard the story where somebody's learning how to cook and they cut the ends off their roast because they learned it from their mom or whoever. They cut out the ends off their roast because it didn't fit in the pan that they had. So like because that person like watched their mom cut off the ends, they wound up like cutting off the ends too because it was part of just the process of what they thought. So as a dirt wizard, I had a hard time like separating this and that.
So what, they're the same thing?
Yes, right, yeah, exactly. But also because of all those things, like I wound up with a slight background in programming, in rules because of the criminal justice thing, a background in writing, a background in general game design, a background in music, a background in a little bit of background in acting. So I was doing this like acting thing on the side. So I put that together, and I wanted to get more into games. But about that time, when I was in New York, our studio got sold to Publishers Clearinghouse, like the big check people, like come to your house, $1 million a week for life. So I briefly did casino games because I like continuing to be employed. So we did casino games, and that's an industry that you can certainly be in. And I left New York. I left that industry, and I came down here to Maryland, and I came to work for Big Huge Games. Big Huge was always on my list, even when I was doing like that first round of like paper, like necktie, like things. Big Huge is on my list because they shuttered when 38 Studios shuttered. And then they came back, like Tim Train and all those guys like came back together, rebought the name. And to me, if you were that you can name your studio whatever you want. If you're that passionate about restarting your studio, that's got to be a good place to be. So I was a QA tester at Big Huge for about 7 or 8 months, and then I became their community manager because I had this bevy of experience. Actually, I brought graph paper into my interview with Big Huge, and I was like talking about like when you get asked in an interview, you often get asked like, what games are you playing, what do you like, and I pulled out graph paper from my bag and I was like, I like this game because of these reasons, and like was able to like sketch out like stuff, and I just have always tried to like keep that with me of all sorts of mechanics. So I was there for about 4 years, doing community management for both the studio and the game Dominations, and Arcane Showdown, which was the last game that launched while I was there. And at that time, I found out that I was going to become a dad to twins, and I thought that I should get a stay-at-home job, so that way I could stay at home and be with the twins and like help raise them, because it's going to be a lot of work. My twins were born in March of 2020. And I did not know at that time, when I was like applying for jobs before that everybody got a stay-at-home job in March of 2020. But fortunately, I actually got a big step up, because I got to go work for Unity. So I was at Unity for a year and a half, as their learning support manager. And that role was a hybrid of basically like community management, where you were engaging with people to try to like get them to fix gaps in their knowledge of where they are with the Unity engine, but also it was like it was more technical than any other community manager job might be, because you need to know all of how the engine works. You need to know how the graphics work. You need to know how the compiler works. You need to know like all the parts, the ins and outs of the Unity engine. Thankfully, I was dealing more with beginners, but like questions did arise and did crop up, so you wind up like learning a lot yourself while you're doing that kind of job. So I did that for about a year and a half, all through their IPO and their public offerings, and then we got the opportunity. During this time, I was making #Blood nights and weekends with some friends that I knew from New York. Cody and Andrew I worked with at Funtank and at Publishers Clearinghouse and stuff, and they were like roommates with guys in Long Island. They're doing the animation for #Blood. And at the end of my time with Unity, we got an offer from Humble Games to go full time. So in December of 2021, I was able to go full time at Exit 73 Games, start Tin Heart Interactive as a full time LLC, and then we've been working on #Blood ever since. And while we're working on like the next project, we had a publisher meeting this morning and some other stuff. So yeah. Sorry, long story.
Nice.
I've been at this a long time.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah.
Oh, keep going. Finish. Wrap it up.
Give
me that bow.
that's sort of where we got to the title of today's hangout, was like, surviving and adapting in this industry is to wear many hats and is to take on many roles and to sort of adapt and change yourself over time. Iterate on yourself. That's a better way to say it. There you go.
I love that. There are times when I will stop people if they're giving a long story. This is not one of those times, because it was a great story. You've got great energy, and it's just a good story. It is, yeah. I definitely get the reason that you proposed the wearing multiple hats as the topic for today, and why how interesting your journey has been. You've moved from design to writing to education to community management, and a little bit of all of it. My main takeaway from all of this is bring graphing paper into your interviews. Is that seems like the most important? Yeah, I love that.
It's like bringing a big sword to battle. You don't need to use it, but you can just threaten people with it. You're like, I know what I'm talking about. I brought graph paper. I got graph paper on index cards. I got graph paper on index cards. It's a double whammy of both an index card, because you can shuffle them around, and graph paper so you can draw and doodle. Key.
It's funny. I'm a no lines, no dots.
Oh, okay. There you go.
No squares guy. Yeah, it's because my brain is chaos, and otherwise, I don't know. I get lost with lines.
No, I love it.
My version of that for interviews, by the way, is I'll almost always, if I want the job anyway, if it's what I'm very excited about, I'll almost always interview a couple of their players, and then I'll casually bring that up. I'll be like, I had a couple of play tests with your players, and blah blah blah. That's my favorite. That's my like sneaky I do know what I'm doing.
There you go. Yeah. So awesome. I did that when I applied at Big Huge. Is they ask you to talk about a game you played, and I wrote them a bug for Dominations when I applied to be a QA tester. So whenever you do that, seriously do that. Play the game or watch it on Twitch or do whatever you can to know what they're actively producing. The faster you can speak the language of the studio, the faster you can get on board, the faster you feel like you belong. Like smart moves.
Yeah. I think in general, it really is, we don't need to spend too long here, but it's a good takeaway. In general, any kind of prep you can do for interviews that is like active work that you would be doing for them is really strong. So like if you're an engineer, do a little bit of thinking about how they might have solved some of their problems, or better yet, come up with something that you feel like their product could use in one form or function, and have a little bit of pseudocode about how that might work. If you're a designer, definitely, I always come in prepared with new features or new games, depending on what the situation calls for. And they don't need to be super in depth, but just a little bit of forethought, always makes the interviews much smoother, and then basically shows that you do your homework, which people like. So anyway, let's talk about multiple hats, because you've definitely worn a couple of them.
Yeah. It's funny because the things that you do have downstream effects that you don't often think about. One of the hats that I had was in those New York days when I was like learning how to do everything. I did a lot of game jams, and one game jam I went to, I specifically wanted to do audio. And so that's it. I'm not bringing my design notebook. I'm bringing my computer, obviously, because I got to digitize everything. We got to share it around. But I'm gonna pitch myself as an audio guy to the rest of the teams. So I brought a bell set, like a glockenspiel, and just made like wacky sound effects. But what I did after the game jam is I packaged those up and posted those on the Unity asset store for other people to have and download as a free thing. Like, I mean, I did it as a free game jam. I can give it away for free. That's great. When it came to the interview at Unity downstream, I can say like, hey, I know your ecosystem. I know your environment. I've published, like, not only have I used Unity at various places, but I've also published assets in the asset store. So that had downstream effects that I think helped get me picked up when I was at Unity.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's really cool. It shows like double value as well. It isn't always worth it necessarily, but I'm definitely personally invested in efficiency of time. Like, actually, this podcast is a great example of it. This is a live community event to keep people engaged and like give people something to look forward to every week in the Discord. But also we record it, and also we stream it live, and also we like, this is me just networking with cool people like you, Greg. Like,
yeah.
Whatever you can do to get that efficiency of time. And then also, I think in this case, you're talking about basically using it as interview prep. It was a game jam just for funsies, but also you got out of it a stronger interview for this job at Unity.
Yo, exactly. Yeah, think about bullet lines, bullet points on your CV whenever you can. And actually, I have two. I have a CV, like a curriculum vitae, which is a list of everything, and then for every job, I curtail that and then put that into a 1-page or a 2-page like a resume. And keep the two documents separate. Where you've got like a full like long list of everything, and then a condensed like these are all the things we did. So
yeah, I love that. Awesome. Well, so I want to get into specifically wearing multiple hats, because obviously interview prep, great, good, we all want it. But wearing multiple hats is definitely something that in general we actually, for instance, advocate against in some ways. We'll talk about that more, I think, at the Indie Game Academy for juniors breaking in. But give us that intro. Like, if we're doing the 101, if we're starting a class on wearing multiple hats, how would you start that class? What would you tell us?
Sure. At the very beginning, you need to de-hype and demystify the Ubermensch of like doing everything yourself. Because that is going to be your gut reaction to be like, I can do everything myself. Because if I don't do it, it's not going to get done. There's certainly that fear and that tendency, which is probably why a lot of us start out that way. What eventually you wind up coming back to is that you wind up having your whole team wear a lot of hats. So that way you can all essentially change who's the conductor at different times. Our game #Blood that we launched recently was a team of 5. So it was 2 artists, 2 engineers, and myself. By and large, that made the division of work pretty easy to say like, all right, I don't need to do any of the art. I don't need to do any of the programming. If I can just sit and write and come up with some mechanics that we can repeat over the game and make them, build a difficulty curve, that's great. Until you actually sit down and do the nitty gritty of it, and you're like, oh, these 2 guys are porting to all the systems, so they're swamped. So if there's a puzzle that I know how to program, then I'm going to start and do the program. If there's a piece of art that these guys haven't created yet, like we need a placeholder, a piece of art, so that way we can get at least a playable version, get to playable as quick as you can. So it's not about owning these hats. It's not about keeping them away from other people. It's about knowing when it's your turn, your role to don that responsibility, and then pass it back to the rest of your team.
Hmm.
Um, one of the key areas was level design. We did a lot of level design. It's a dungeon crawler. So every in a modern setting. So it was really kind of fun to imagine. What does the mall look like as a dungeon? What does the school look like as a dungeon? A hospital and a mini mart. And so I wound up doing graph paper first, obviously first pass. Then I did a digital version, and I sent that to Bob, who is the level artist, and he wound up making it pretty and looking good and stuff like that. Um, but we got to a point where Bob was not just like making pretty levels. He was like, "Hey, I'm going to do some of the levels for the sewer." We had a whole sewer system, and I didn't fight that at all. I was like, "Great, Bob, you do the sewer systems. You understand what I've been doing for level design. You understand how to make it look great. Go. Like this is a safe place. They're all like straight shot from point A to point B, like sewer systems. There's not a lot of like hidden features or other puzzles that get involved. Like that was a great thing to hand off to somebody else, so that way they can like expand their repertoire as well. So it's building your team and building your team's hat wearing capability, hat rack, if we want to keep the metaphor rolling and stuff like that. Yeah.
So for context here, how big is the team for Blood?
Five. It's five people.
Okay. Yeah.
I was able to take on an intern from time to time, and they were beneficial because they were able to like give us that outsider player perspective. Before we got funding, we were very much a nights and weekends operation. We would essentially use events like MagFest or Too Many Games or things like that as our milestones. So you would work and work and work and build a milestone to the event, and then you actually got a lot of feedback. When we were in full production, we didn't get a ton of feedback. So having some interns to be able to like give us that like real player experience was tremendously insightful. It's always hard to say what's fun without that perspective.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of my favorite little like idioms is who you play test your game with is who you're making your game for. So if you're playtesting only with your team, then it's a game for your team and nobody else.
Right.
I also really love, actually, this is like a really simple one, but I really love events as milestones. I don't know that I've necessarily run into that before. People like kind of naturally do it. But I really like the idea of like our roadmap is based upon these big events that we're going to go to and showcase.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's really solid, I think, and it's something people can take away immediately.
Yeah.
Okay, so
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, please, you first. Oh, right.
We used too many games, which was January, and we used Too Many Games was in June or July, based on the year, and MagFest was in January. So they were basically like 6 months apart. Was our cadence. So.
Okay, yeah, that sounds about right. Awesome. Yeah. All right, so yeah, getting back to the multiple hats, I am definitely curious. A team of 5. In this team of 5, do people have areas that are their ownership? Is one person the level designer, but it just so happens that people are kind of like passing around a little bit of that, or is it more like we're all just everything?
No, there are domains.
Okay.
None of the final art was any of the placeholder garbage that I touched, which for a good reason. So yeah, Chris and Bob. For the team in general, I'm punching way above my level. I'm working with some top-notch talent, and so I've been very, very fortunate. And they let me dabble and try things out. So maybe that's also the key to success. But I don't know how to tell you to find top-notch talent. Unfortunately,
you look and you cross your fingers.
yeah. But these are people that I met when I was in New York. These are people that I've known for 10 years, I think, when we started full time. So be mindful of the people that you're talking to right now, the people that you're networking with today, because who knows, if you keep in touch with them in a decade, they might have a job for you, or they might be like, hey, I remember you were interested in telling stories through games, which I think was Cody's specific like idea. He was like, I want you to come write this game, and that was it. Mostly was just to come do narrative stuff, and we had our first milestone with Humble, and it didn't feel like dungeon crawlery enough, so I programmed a little puzzle, this like up down, there's a crystal puzzle in Blood, and that's where that comes from. And I threw that in right before our milestone went out, because just that was a tool in my toolbox that I brought that can help elevate the whole project.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So here's maybe my main my main curiosity surrounding multiple hats. We had an episode with one of my personal favorite people in the world. Actually, wait, let me comment for a hot second on something Greg just said. Number one, people that you're interacting with right now might be your co-founders in the future, or might just be collaborators in one form or function. And they can really be people that you like don't expect. A recruiter who turned you down might be your best friend 2 months later. You don't know. So definitely the sort of always be branding, always be networking, like very powerful. Mark in the comments says always be branding. Very much true. Do your best to represent yourself well, basically at all times. And then when you run into somebody super cool, like don't hesitate. Just say hi and make the connection. I'm like super pumped because I've been talking with Will Shen, who's was design director at Bethesda for a long time, and literally wrote the lines "Oh, you're finally awake" in Skyrim, which is like amazing, blows my mind. And that was just because like I ran into him at GDC and made it and started a conversation, and then asked if he'd be interested in hanging out with us. So yeah. Very little aside. Make sure you're networking all the time, and don't think that somebody like won't build a connection with you for whatever reason. Just attempt it. And then the second thing I want to call it is much shorter. There is a direct correlation with the likelihood of a startup working if the team already has strong rapport. So like one of your biggest considerations for finding team members is this somebody I can hang out with? Is this somebody I can get along with? Is this somebody I can get through conflict with? And especially if you already have a history of doing those things with that person, then great. So, talent is one thing important. You need people who make good art and stuff. But you also need people that you're not going to rip their head off if after a month or two of production. Okay. Those are my side notes from what you just said. Here, I'm going to get back to the multiple hats for a bit. We had a great episode a number of months ago now with Charlene Chodan. He's an old mentor of mine and a wonderful dude. He runs his own company called Masala Games. They're publishing a game called Detective Dotson. Go check it out. And he talks a lot about sort of the T-shaped experience and how important that is. You've got like one area, one vertical that you're really kick-ass at, and then you sort of touch everything else and understand everything else. I'm curious about your perspective. If let's say we're talking to founders right now, people who are like actively starting a studio. I'm curious your perspective on the generalist's journey, the multiple hat thing. Do you think that is a strength? Would you recommend people approach it that way? Would you modify it with some hindsight?
Are the founder is a generalist, or the founder is looking to add generalists to their team?
The whole founding team.
So the whole founding team is generalists.
If we're putting together a team, should we get a bunch of generalists, or what is the proper mix of generalist versus expert?
I would want a pillar for art, and I would want a pillar for engineering. I would want somebody who's an expert in art and somebody who's an expert in engineering. Whether or not you call them your art director or your CTO or whatever, titles aside, there are hurdles that you need to get around with getting the game digital, and there are hurdles that you need to get around to make the game look good enough to stick in people's brains. So I think those are the two most important roles that you should get an expert for. I think that beyond that, if you've got a bevy of experience, I think that would be beneficial. You also want somebody who's a generalist, who's not afraid to write emails to your publisher, or to figure out, to sort through, somebody who's got the fortitude to sort through all the comments and figure out what is fluff and what is real when it comes to feedback. Because there's sometimes real nuggets in there, and you can't actually see that at surface level. And so that itself is a skill, and it's hard to like quantify what that skill is. But I don't think that would be somebody's core skill, obviously. So I think having a number of generalists is good, but if you had one artist and one engineer, you kind of can't get around that.
Yeah, so it sounds like the proper mix, air quotes, because we're all making it up. We don't know.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Right. It sounds like the proper mix, according to you, what has worked for you at least, is having a pillar in art, having a pillar in engineering, and then sort of everybody else, the whole rest of the team, might have domains that they are more experienced in, but in general, you're sharing the load as much as you can. And it sounds like even some engineering and some art is getting shared as well.
Yes, yeah. And like Bob is traditionally an artist, and I talked about him doing level design before. He also did all the audio for the game. He did the whole soundtrack and the wacky voices and stuff like that. for our next pitch, I've started noodling on my bass guitar just to like do some like melodies and stuff like that. Because I didn't do it with blood, like thematically, musically, it didn't fit the genre that I could perform in.
Hmm.
But it's nice to be able to like pop back and forth between that. And or it's nice to give a task to somebody knowing that they're fully capable. We've got so many different boss battles and boss fights that we basically just gave that to Andrew, and Andrew like wired up the timing and wired up like the challenge overall like challenge spikes of like I made the boss fights and I made them fun, and he did a great job. And don't you also need to trust the rest of your co-founders? Like everybody, if everybody's really in there with skin in the game to do the best they can, nobody's gonna try to do a bad job. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I think so. In my opinion, and I'm curious if you agree with this,
Mm.
or if you have a modification to it. In my opinion, one of the best things about having generalists is one of the best things about indies, which is that everybody's got skin in the game. Everybody is a sort of creative lead, I guess, together, and therefore they care a hell of a lot more about the project. Usually, anyway, hopefully. Um, and so there's much more like collaborative soup where everybody's kind of coming together and putting in their goodness together. At larger companies where people are much more specialized and much more siloed, they can still make amazing stuff, and I'm not really talking them down, but there's a lot less of like we're kind of deciding what this weird little beautiful egg is together. Do you think that that's true?
I for the most part, I do think there are some indie teams out there that are a little big, or a little unwieldy for the number of people they need for the project that they're making. And as long as you've got a good game, like a good game director, to be like, this is what stays, this is what stays, this is what stays. If you can make sure that that experience is cohesive, start to finish, then that's important. But other than that, everybody's got skin in the game
Yeah.
in an indie team.
Yeah.
And yeah, no. People at large studios definitely like they definitely care about their product. They definitely care about their players. They definitely care about like the individual aspects of art that they're making. But they've got less insight to what the other departments are doing. And I think maybe that's the key difference is you've less insight or less input on how to steer the whole ship.
Does that mean that is there a mass, a number of people, a size of project where it doesn't make as much sense to be generalist anymore? Or do you think even those AAAs could use some generalists?
If they're hiring generalists, I can give you my phone number at the end of this conversation, and I'd love to let them. No. I presume that a lot of the people that are director level, like design director or whatever, do fit in the more of the generalist category,
Hmm.
despite coming up through a specific vertical.
Hmm.
Although they might not think of themselves as a generalist because they've focused on a domain for so long. The nice you I think over time you generally wind up being a generalist because if you interface with the other departments, you learn how to talk their language. You learn how the pipelines work. You learn what kind of access they need to things. You learn like how to even look through Git repositories and other stuff like that. Even if you never thought you'd touch code, you're going to be touching Git, and so you're going to be learning things about different disciplines, which is going to be beneficial to you and to the studio and to your fellow coworkers and everybody.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. So it sounds like, in my mind, this is something I've wondered about myself. In my mind, especially on those smaller teams, having generalists is almost necessary, but also you get something out of it. Um, and I think that thing that you get out of it is that creative collaboration, that like wonder of everybody's just kind of making something cool together.
Mm.
Um, it is now though time for community questions. So we've called Fire. Let me know if I'm saying that right. Up on stage for the first one. Saya, would you like to ask your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All good.
Awesome. And it's sapphire, like the gemstone.
Oh,
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
amazing.
silent
All right,
Y.
got it. All right,
Cool.
Sapphire, what you got for us?
Yeah, so thank you so much so far for all the insight. So I was wondering when we're talking about the generalists and the specialists, when you're building a portfolio, especially if you're aiming to be something like a character designer or like specifically you're focusing on environmental art or something like that, would you be more valuable and more likely to be hired if you're showing more of what you can do? Or should you really, if you're like I really want to be a concept artist and you just show that, So how do you find that balance basically between going for the job you really want and also showcasing your multiple skills?
That's a really good question. So the question is, how do you balance showing your whole array of skills versus versus the importance of focusing for the role you're applying for? Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Cool. I would. I feel like I should caveat this with I'm not a lawyer, because that's often how these things go. Like you'll either get the answer of like I'm not a lawyer, but or it depends. Especially the longer you talk to programmers, like oh how long does it take to solve this problem? How would you do this? Well, depends. Anyhow, back to the point. I think that if you were applying for the role, showing more curated, focused work is probably a better way to go. That's the criteria in which you're going to be judged or leveraged. If you get that foot in the door, if you can have that conversation, that's when I think you can really expand it and be like, these are all the other things that are in my toolbox. These are all the other talents and skills that I have that I can bring to the table. Because the job that they hire you for might be for that need right away. And then in 6, 8, 10 months, they might be like, "Hey, we're trying to populate this area of the world, and we're either looking at like buying an asset pack, or we're looking at reusing assets, or we need to come up with theming for 45 villagers in the next 10 days. That's when you can step up and be like, hey, here's other things that I've done in the past, or hey, nights and weekends I've sort of sketched this because it's like I've already like thought about this, or already like know what the art style of the game is, and can I do this, can I work with this. When I was at Big Huge, there was a QA tester who was a pretty talented artist, pretty skilled artist. And I tried, because I was community manager, I was like knew a lot of departments, wound up getting them some side work at the studio to do community assets, like 3D community assets that we could use in the game. And he then eventually became a marketing artist, and then it's like moved up the artist track, like sort of sideways that way. So came in as QA and then wound up as an artist. So I think that would be my suggestion: is focus on getting hired for the role that you're applying for, and then bring your toolbox and then show that early, often, and especially where appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, long
Did that answer your question, Sapphire? No, that was perfect.
Yeah, that helps so much. Thank you. I really appreciate it, Tin.
Absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna send you back to the audience here, Sapphire, and I'm gonna pull Rick up. But I have always I have the same perspective on that, so I would just echo what Greg said. In general, what you want to be showcasing is exactly what they ask for on the description, and anything else is fluff, is extra, is good, but they need to know that you can do exactly what's on the job description first, because that's what they need. When people put out job listings, try to think about it from their perspective a little bit. Usually, like something's going wrong. That's why they put this job description out there, because they just aren't able to get the number of levels built they need built or whatever. And so they have an actual need, an actual problem on their team. Like, God, we keep bottlenecking at this one place. So you need to be able to solve that first, and then everything else is like, ooh, great, gravy on top. But definitely, you want to make sure that they are 100% confident you can solve the problem before you talk about anything else.
The other thing that you might want to do is look at your resume and the job description side by side and see if you're using similar language in the job description and the resume. If the job description says like agile and scrum, and you just have like agile written on your resume, like you might want to say like, oh, agile and scrum, because that's parts of the thing that you've done in the past. They might wind up like looking specifically for keywords based on the way that they've built that job description to really hone in on that. Don't lie. Don't lie on your job description. Don't lie on your resume. But
don't lie. But you can go get certified in Scrum like 2 weeks before you apply. That's fine.
Yeah.
I think you can also. I think this is something that it sounds like you basically do. You can also have multiple versions of your portfolio, multiple versions of your resume. Or what I like to do is, especially for my web portfolio, I have it split by sections, so you can have a section that's for your art and a section that's for your programming or whatever else. And you can send people to the appropriate section. And that way, they're not getting confused. They see what you're good at in the area they're asking for, but they also will see, like, oh, there's some other stuff that they do too. Cool. All right, Rick, give us your question.
All right, so Greg, I saw that you had. It's good to see you here, by the way.
Hi.
Yeah, so it is. I saw you showing hashtag blood at several conventions, and the game was really good the first time I saw it, and every time I saw you show it, it was always better. So I'm curious, at what point did you guys decide to start pitching to publishers, and what was your approach like before you got picked up by Humble?
So we approached. We do a couple things. Number one, we were promoting the game online the same way we were going to live events. And when we had amassed enough, basically following or interest, then publishers actually started to reach out to us. So promote your game early. Don't design in a silo or whatever. Promote your game, get it out there, because it will get the right kind of eyeballs on your game, on your project. So that helped the idea of getting a publisher. There were a couple economic factors that helped line up the team to convince them to essentially quit their day jobs to come work at this. There were some financial benchmarks that we needed to hit to guarantee the project was completed. And then some of it was just like timing. Like my contract at Unity ended basically right before we got our publisher deal. And don't expect a publisher deal to ink overnight. It's going to take 8 or 10 months. It might even take longer now because it's kind of chaotic out there. So make sure you've got like some of your financials in place. We talked about starting studios earlier too. Like that should be on the forefront of your mind is like studio health, studio financials. And that's a hat that sucks that nobody wants to wear, but is tremendously important for the lifeblood of yourself, for your co-founders, and for your longevity in the industry. It's boring and it feels like adult work, but it's so important. Getting back to like some of the showcase of the game and like having it look better and better and better. I'm glad that you liked it, like every time you saw it. But we didn't think that it was where we were ready to publish until somebody could sit down and play the game and not turn around and ask us questions. One of the great things about showcasing the game is you get a lot of player feedback, and they say like, "Oh, I'm stuck here. I don't understand how to do this puzzle. I don't get this hint." But if they sit down and play and don't ask you anything and get up and say, "Good," and walk away, then you did a good job. You didn't have to explain anything else, so you can feel like you did a good job with your game. So that's why we continue to bring it out to events. Yeah.
Yeah, but my big takeaways on that is nail your first time user experience and handle enough marketing that the publishers notice you.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Nice. Thank you, Rick. I'm going to send you back to the audience. Very much so. I mean, one of the big ones that every single person seems to say when we ask them about this is just be marketing absolutely as soon as you can and get it in front of as many people as you possibly can, both for the sake of playtesting and for the sake of attracting an audience earlier on.
Yeah.
I'm going to call Wendy up to the stage. Wendy, I have no idea what your question is because I can't find it, but you know, you're a great community member. I bet it's a great question. So what you got for us?
Well, I was picking up an order, sorry, and so I missed part of what was the conversation. I'm like, well, I'm always the one to ask the professional development one, but everybody, every now and then people surprise me and somebody else will ask. I'm like, okay, great. So, hi Tim, thank you first of all. I guess I'm just always wondering, what people do in their own careers for professional development, and if that's any different than what you would recommend for anyone else, because sometimes some people just don't do it, or they have a specific way they do it, but they might recommend something else for somebody else. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Early on, I went hard. I did everything I could. I went to every physical event, tried to do every game jam I could. I that was all like a lot of pre-online stuff. But when I was at Unity, they introduced this thing called Pathways, where you could do on the Unity Learn website. You like did a number of tutorials, and at the end of that, you could get a badge on your LinkedIn page. So I wound up like doing those because we were playtesting those, essentially playtesting those before we released them. Right now, I've got a window to actually look back at professional development, and I'm reading a book. I'm reading a book about I don't want. Well, it's not. It doesn't matter. It's about how to write a mystery novel. And I'm thinking about that in terms of games. So I'm looking at like the cross discipline of how to write a mystery novel and how do I convert. What questions does that bring up in me to make games?
Cool. Very intriguing. I like that. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, thank you, Wendy. The I've started doing just 10 pages before I sleep every night, just reading 10 pages every night. And it's been actually so delightful. Sometimes I'm like, "Oh god, I just want to go to sleep." But I finally read Game Feel, which for all game designers out there is like a staple. I'm reading Gamification by Design now. It's super awesome. Just a little bit of knowledge seeking, I think, is always good in your life, whoever you are, whatever you do. All
I've been
right.
a big fan of the Jesse Shell book, and I have these
Oh,
the deck of lenses. I've got it at my desk.
yes.
So that's the one thing I've got at my desk, and then the other one I have at my desk of cards is the accessible player experience. This is Able
Wow.
Gamers. This is thinking about accessibility and stuff like that. So when we started Blood, I basically went through both of these decks to like ask questions and think about design and stuff like that.
Huh.
And as we approach our next project, like that's why they're here on the top of the pile to like go back through and think about those kind of things.
That's super cool. Really fascinating. I love Jesse Shell's Art of Game Design. I One of my favorite quotes by him is in the very first chapter where he says your first 10 games are going to suck, so you might as well get them out of the way as fast as you can. Really solid. We've been looking at a lot of stats about founders, and it turns out that it's usually your fourth game that actually makes any kind of money as a founder. So you got to get 3 shitty ones out of the way before you're gonna make any real money. Awesome. So we are basically at the end of the episode, but I want to do a community question real quick, which is where we reiterate one of the most important things that we learned from the guest, so that we don't forget it. So the first person to give us the correct answer to this question will get 3 house get points to the house of their choice. And the question is, what should you bring to the interview? What should you bring? Graph paper. Larry nails it.
Stack of 20s was also, also acceptable.
Yeah, also good. Awesome. Larry, let us know which house you want to give that to. House Warrior, Rogue, Cleric, or Ranger. You've earned 3 points. The graph paper one I decided to ask, not because I think you should actually bring graph paper, although it sounds like that's great. What I more mean is like bring your special sauce to the interview. What is it that you can do that shows that you're awesome, that you know what you're doing, that you're thinking about their problem, and that you're trying to be a wonderful candidate? There's a bunch of ways that you can kind of interpret that. I like to interview users. Greg likes to bring graph paper and cards. What is it that you can bring? All right. We've got time probably for one last question. Mark, I didn't see if you wanted to come on stage. You want me to ask for you, or do you want to come up? All right. Go ahead, Mark.
All right. Hold on while I look about how I phrased it, because okay. If someone wanted to be a generalist indie studio founder, for example, like a friend of mine, but they don't have time to be a barista, band member, writer, QA, dad, what would you recommend?
Don't copy anybody. Start from where you are. I think that is the most important thing. By trying to funnel anybody's. I love Tim Schafer, but I'm not gonna be Tim Schafer. You need to start where you are, and you need to look at your skill sets and put them to work for you. The specialist part of what is going to make you a great developer are all of the unique things that have happened to you along the way.
Wow. Mark, did that answer your question?
I don't know if it answered your question. I hope it made you feel good.
I think that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. I love that as a final question as well. I mentioned this literally last episode, so forgive me if I'm being a broken record. But one of my favorite people that I've interviewed on this show is Greg the Fat Man, or excuse me, Greg. What am I talking about? George the Fat Man Sanger. You've confused me, Greg. Who's an old hat in audio and games. Thank you. And when he came on the show, one of my favorite things ever is he said, "Find the U-shaped hole in the universe." So that's it. You don't need to emulate anybody on here. However the hell you make it work is how you're gonna make it work. If you can't manage to run another job while also doing everything else, how else can you make it work? What else? What is your special sauce? The U-shaped hole that's going to make founding a studio possible for you. And definitely the sort of like weekend morning 2 hours a day at best founders is pretty damn common. That actually seems to be like one of the most common ways indie founders get started. All right. It is the end of the episode. Before we say goodbye, there's 2 things we like to do, Greg. The first thing is assign some homework. So what is something that the audience could do in the next week? It'll take them about an hour that they can to help them practice some of what we talked about here today?
Investigate a discipline that you are not familiar with. Even if it is confusing or weird or scary, there's a lot of like tweening, which is an animation term where you go from one thing to another thing. Like I've never tried to do that. I've never done that. I've never done animation by hand. But I know after working with the artists, like I know what tweening is. I know what shooting on twos is. I know a lot more animation terms and can speak to that a little more. Even if you don't understand it at first, the next time you approach this subject or the next time you approach that topic, it's going to seem more familiar to you. So find a topic, find an area of the industry that you don't know much about, and see if you can learn a little bit about.
That's awesome. All right, I'm going to push it a little bit further because we love to get people publicly posting this if they're willing to. I want you to find a topic. Greg wants you to find a topic or an area of game development that is not normally in your wheelhouse, is not normally in your silo, and spend some time learning about it. And then do us a favor and write up what you've learned for the rest of the industry to learn from on LinkedIn. And you can tag the Indie Game Academy. You can tag Greg. Excuse me, what's your last name? Greg Lane.
Lane, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, Tin Heart Interactive is the studio that I like own. So the Tin Heart is
Yes.
that's yeah. And if people call me Tin or Tim like from time to time, and I'm like, that's fine. That's you got it.
We'll accept it. We'll take it.
Yeah.
Nobody has called me Indie yet, although I'll totally take that.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So tag Indie Game Academy, tag Greg Lane, maybe tag Tin Heart Interactive, and let us know what you learned, what you actually studied, and that way we're all sharing a little bit of knowledge. And of course, we'll also celebrate you and get excited that you did the homework. All right, it's the end of the episode. Greg, before we say goodbye, is there anything you want to plug here, or any last words of wisdom you'd like to impart?
Both. Last words of wisdom. Game design, game development is the Renaissance art of our generation. It takes all of the things from all of the other disciplines and makes it into a nice palatable soup. And it's presented as a gift to the player. Take everything that you know in life and present it as a gift to the player. That's my perspective on making and designing games. That's my last word of wisdom. I'm going to plug #Blood, BLUD. Spelled wrong for a couple reasons. Number one, because our teenager protagonist is not using spell check. She's just sort of like hammering it out, firing it off. Also, Blood, BLUD, is an Eastern European demon. So I don't know how up to date you are on demonology, but that sort of plays into it. The hashtag plays into it because it's got social media elements into it as well. #Blood, BLUD on Xbox, PlayStation, Switch, and Steam.
Awesome. Excellent. We will absolutely link that down below. So go check out #Blood, BLUD, and get a copy for yourself. And then perhaps go check out Greg Lane and connect with him. And man, what a freaking, you dropped the atom bomb on us in the last second. Game dev is the Renaissance art of our generation, and it is presented as a gift to our players. How freaking beautiful. If that doesn't get y'all going, if that doesn't get you fired up, I don't know what else will. All right, Greg, thank you so much.
I didn't prepare an encore. That's all I got.
Yes, I gave you a second, but that's fine. Thank you so much for being here. This has been a fantastic episode of the show. Thank you for answering questions and giving us your time, especially given that you've got COVID.
This is great. No, this is super fun. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All right. And thank you, audience, for being here, asking your own questions. And as always, if you enjoyed, we ask that you send it along to just one other person. Who else is somebody who could learn something from Greg? And could you please send this recording along to them for us? All right. Goodbye, everybody. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Adios.